He had always been the kind of person people overlooked. Not because he wanted it that way, but because life had slowly taught him to stay quiet and keep his head down. He moved through the world without drawing attention, wearing simple clothes, walking with calm steps, and avoiding places where eyes lingered too long. Music was the one thing that belonged only to him. It was not something he talked about. It was something he lived with quietly in the corners of his days. On this particular afternoon, he found himself in a busy public space filled with noise, movement, and restless energy. People were laughing, talking loudly, scrolling on their phones, and passing time without thinking much about anyone around them. A piano sat nearby, old but polished, placed there for anyone brave enough to touch it. Most people walked past it without a glance. Some stopped to take pictures. Others joked about how they would sound terrible if they tried to play. He noticed the piano the moment he arrived. His eyes rested on it longer than he meant to. His fingers twitched slightly, almost without permission. Playing had always been his escape, but only when no one was watching. Crowds made him uncomfortable. Tension made his chest feel tight. So he did what he usually did. He looked away and chose a seat far from the center, hoping the moment would pass. But moments have a strange way of finding people who want to stay invisible. A small group nearby noticed him watching the piano. They exchanged looks and quiet laughs. To them, he looked like someone who didn't belong there. Someone who would be easy to tease. They spoke loudly enough for others to hear, making playful comments that carried an edge. It wasn't open cruelty, but it wasn't kind either. The kind of humor that makes one person laugh while another feels small. One of them pointed toward the piano and then toward him. Another nudged him with a grin, suggesting he should give it a try. The words sounded friendly on the surface, but the tone told a different story. It was clear they weren't hoping for something beautiful. They were hoping for a mistake, a wrong note, something they could laugh at. He felt the heat rise in his face. His first instinct was to shake his head and look away. He had spent years learning how to avoid moments like this. Stay quiet. Don't react. Let it pass. But the attention kept growing. A few nearby people turned to look. Someone lifted a phone, curious to see what would happen. The group kept pushing, still smiling, still pretending it was all harmless fun. They joked that everyone should hear what he had to offer, that it would be entertaining at least. Each word added weight to his chest. His hands rested on his knees, fingers pressed together tightly. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. Music had always been his safe place, but now it felt like a trap. He thought about leaving. He could stand up, walk away, disappear back into the crowd. No one would stop him. No one would care for long. But another thought crept in, one he didn't expect. A quiet voice inside reminded him of all the times he had been underestimated. All the moments he stayed silent when he wanted to speak. All the nights he played alone, pouring feelings into keys that never judged him. Still, fear held him in place. The crowd grew slightly larger, drawn by the tension of the moment. People love watching uncertainty. They love waiting to see if someone will fail or surprise them. The piano stood there, silent, almost patient, as if waiting for him to decide. He stood up slowly, not because he wanted to impress anyone, and not because he felt brave. He stood because staying seated suddenly felt heavier than standing. His legs felt stiff as he walked toward the piano. The whispers followed him, some amused, some doubtful, some simply curious. He sat down and adjusted the bench. His movements were careful, almost hesitant. The keys were cool under his fingers. For a moment he didn't play. He just breathed. The noise around him faded slightly as his focus narrowed. He closed his eyes, not dramatically, but naturally, the way he always did when he played alone. A few people chuckled quietly, thinking the pause was part of the joke. Someone muttered that he probably didn't know what he was doing. The group that had pushed him there watched closely, ready to laugh at the first wrong sound. Inside, he was fighting a storm of thoughts. What if his hands shook too much? What if he forgot everything? What if they were right? But beneath the fear was something steadier. A deep familiarity with the instrument in front of him. A relationship built over years of quiet practice and private moments. He placed his fingers on the keys. The first note hadn't been played yet, but something had already shifted. The room felt different, as if everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself the way he always did. The music was there waiting, not to perform for them but to carry him through the moment. This was not about proving anything. It was about surviving the weight of all those eyes without losing himself. His fingers hovered, ready. The noise around him softened, replaced by anticipation. Some expected laughter. Some expected awkwardness. No one expected what was coming. And in that fragile pause, just before the first sound, he made a silent choice. No matter how it ended, he would play honestly. Not for them, for himself. The moment before the music began felt endless. And yet, it was only the beginning. He finally pressed down on the keys, and the first note trembled into the air. It was shaky at first, unsure of itself, mirroring the tremor in his own hands. The sound was small but clear, and it seemed to hang between the people watching. A few snickers arose, not loud enough to be disrespectful, but enough to make him aware of their presence. He ignored them, keeping his focus on the keys, letting his fingers find their rhythm. The group that had pushed him to play leaned in slightly, exchanging glances and quiet whispers. They had expected a disaster, something funny to share later with friends. But he continued, slowly building confidence with each note. He was cautious but deliberate, testing the piano's response, feeling the vibration of each key under his fingertips. As he played, something changed in the air. The laughter began to fade, replaced by a quiet curiosity. The rhythm of the notes caught the attention of others nearby, people who had been passing by without noticing the scene. They stopped and leaned closer, drawn by the unexpected depth of sound. Even some of the group that had mocked him initially paused, their expressions shifting from amusement to interest. He was aware of the crowd now, but he did not let it control him. His mind focused on the music, the sequence of notes that had been imprinted in his memory from countless hours of practice. Each note was a small victory over the fear that had gripped him moments ago. Each chord built a bridge from uncertainty to confidence. For a while, the performance was quiet, almost delicate. His fingers moved carefully, caressing the keys as if they were fragile. The notes carried a gentle sadness, a hint of longing, and those who listened could feel a subtle emotional weight. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, realizing that they had underestimated him. The tension in the air began to change, becoming a mix of surprise and respect. The man did not glance at anyone. He did not seek approval. He was fully immersed, letting the music guide his hands, letting it speak what words could not. He remembered the nights he had spent alone, practicing in dimly lit rooms, pouring all his thoughts and emotions into melodies. Those solitary hours were his training ground, and now they served him in front of an audience he never wanted. Some people whispered to each other, trying to identify who he was and where he had learned to play. Others simply stood silently, captivated by the sound. The group that had originally pushed him to play looked increasingly unsettled. Their expressions betrayed their surprise, and the confident amusement they had felt was quickly being replaced by doubt and unease. A small child stepped closer, holding the hand of a parent. The child's eyes were wide with fascination, completely absorbed in the music. The parent gently guided them back, but not before a smile spread across the child's face. It was a smile of pure wonder, untainted by expectation or judgment. He noticed the child briefly, but his attention remained on the piano. The music began to take on a more complex tone. The earlier hesitation was gone. His hands moved faster, yet with control, producing notes that were full and rich. The melody had layers now, small shifts in pace and intensity that revealed his skill. It was clear to anyone listening that this was not the work of a beginner. The crowd continued to grow, some stopping their daily routines to watch the unexpected performance. The atmosphere transformed from casual observation to anticipation. Each note seemed to command attention, demanding that people listen closely, that they appreciate the effort and emotion behind the sound. The quiet whispers from the group that had intended to humiliate him grew quieter, replaced by awe and disbelief. He did not smile or show any outward emotion. He did not seek their recognition or approval. But internally, a small spark of satisfaction began to glow. The fear that had clung to him so tightly began to loosen. He could feel it melting away with each chord, replaced by the focused clarity that only music could provide. It was a reminder that no one else's expectations could define his abilities. At one point, a passerby lifted a phone, aiming to record what was happening. The man ignored it as if it did not exist. This was not about going viral or being seen by thousands. It was about this moment, this music, this connection between him and the instrument. Every note carried a fragment of his story, every pause a glimpse of his resilience. The group that had mocked him initially began to shift uncomfortably. They exchanged looks, realizing that they had underestimated not only his skill but his composure. Their teasing had turned into silence. Some averted their eyes, not out of embarrassment alone, but because they were witnessing something unexpected and powerful. Their joke was no longer funny. The tables had subtly turned. Meanwhile, other members of the crowd began to quietly cheer him on, murmuring encouragement. A few nodded in admiration. Strangers who had no connection to him were suddenly drawn into his world, moved by the beauty and honesty of his playing. It was a rare moment where talent and courage collided, and the audience, large or small, could not ignore it. He continued playing, feeling the energy from the piano and the subtle shifts in the room. The melody became bolder, each note carrying more intention. He was no longer just reacting. He was creating, shaping the music in ways that were both personal and impactful. The notes resonated, filling the space with a presence that commanded respect and attention. A man standing nearby crossed his arms and leaned forward slightly, a look of genuine surprise on his face. A woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, acknowledging how wrong they had been about him. The child who had been watching earlier bounced slightly with excitement, absorbing every sound. The atmosphere had changed completely from moments before. What had started as potential humiliation was slowly transforming into an unexpected showcase of talent. His breathing was steady, and his fingers danced over the keys with newfound assurance. Every hesitation that had marked the beginning of the performance was gone. The music carried his thoughts, his fears, his hopes, and his perseverance. He was no longer simply reacting to the audience. He was telling a story through each note, allowing listeners to feel something that words could never express. The group that had tried to push him into embarrassment could no longer pretend. They were caught in a mixture of awe and regret. They had set out to make him uncomfortable, but instead, they were forced to witness his courage and skill. It was an uncomfortable revelation for them, a reminder that people should not be judged solely by appearances or assumptions. By now, people who had initially walked by continued to linger. Some had returned after being drawn by the sound. Others stood silently, captivated by the unfolding performance. The music, once fragile and tentative, had grown into something commanding yet tender, capable of holding attention without any words, without any explanation. He felt a quiet sense of calm and control. The crowd around him had shifted in their perception, but that no longer mattered. He was connected to the piano, to the music, and to the truth of his own ability. The moment became less about them and more about him, and in that, he found an inner strength he had not fully realized before. Even as the final notes of this section echoed through the space, a quiet murmur of appreciation began to ripple through the crowd. The shift in energy was palpable. People were no longer waiting for a mistake. They were listening, truly listening, to something extraordinary that had emerged from someone they had underestimated. The tables had turned quietly but decisively, leaving the air thick with anticipation for what would come next. As he prepared for the next segment, he felt a mix of relief and determination. Relief that he had survived the first challenge, determination to continue playing without compromise, without fear, and without concern for judgment. What began as a situation intended to humiliate him had already become an unexpected triumph. The story was far from over, but a change had occurred, both in him and in the people watching. The seeds of disbelief and admiration had been planted, and the stage was set for something even more remarkable to unfold. He took a deep breath and continued playing. The music began to change, becoming richer and more layered. Each note was no longer timid. It carried intention and emotion. His fingers moved with a confidence that had not been there in the first moments. The room felt different now, as if the piano itself had awakened and demanded attention. The audience, which had been leaning in with curiosity, now sat and watched with silent wonder. The group that had tried to humiliate him was now shifting in their positions, uncomfortable and unsure. Their smirks were gone, replaced by furrowed brows and a shared, silent realization that they had misjudged him. They had expected an awkward, clumsy performance, but what they were witnessing was far from that. Each chord told a story, each transition revealed depth and control, and their confidence in mocking him began to crumble. People around the edges of the crowd started murmuring softly to each other. Some spoke of the unexpected skill, others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The man continued, not noticing the whispers, not seeking approval, but fully immersed in the music. It was as if the piano and he were one, speaking a language that no one had expected to hear. A woman standing near the back held her hand to her mouth, astonished. She whispered to the person beside her that she had never heard anyone play like that in a public space before. A few others nodded in agreement, their eyes wide, trying to take in every detail. The energy in the room had shifted from anticipation to amazement. What had started as a tense, almost uncomfortable situation had become something entirely different. His music began to rise and fall, flowing in ways that carried emotion beyond words. There was sorrow in some notes, hope in others, and a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around him. He did not rush. He allowed each section to breathe, letting the audience absorb the sound fully. Even those who had mocked him now stood still, unable to look away, unable to interrupt the unexpected story unfolding through the piano. A few younger people in the crowd leaned forward, caught by the rhythm, the melody, and the subtle changes in tone. They whispered to each other in awe, trying to understand where such skill came from. Others, older and more experienced with music, exchanged impressed glances, silently acknowledging the talent before them. It was rare for a moment to feel so powerful without any words, and yet it was happening right here, right now. He did not look around or seek any recognition. He focused entirely on the music, on the keys beneath his fingers, and on the feelings he wanted to express. Each chord was deliberate, each pause intentional. He played as if the world outside did not exist, as if only the piano and his emotions were real. This focus allowed him to overcome the lingering fear from before. His confidence was growing with every note. The group that had tried to humiliate him finally exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their whispers stopped, and some of them looked down at the floor, realizing that they had acted carelessly. The man before them was not only skilled but completely unaffected by their attempt to embarrass him. Their plan to mock had failed, and there was nothing they could do to reverse the impact of what was unfolding. A few people from the audience began to quietly clap between notes, hesitant at first, unsure if it was appropriate. But the clapping slowly grew, gentle at first and then more confident. It was an acknowledgement of the effort, the talent, and the courage it took to continue playing despite the pressure. The man noticed it only slightly, a small recognition that he was making a difference, that he was being heard. The music shifted again, now becoming more complex and expressive. He had moved past simple melodies into a combination of harmonies and rhythms that demonstrated both skill and emotional depth. The audience could feel it. The sound was no longer just a series of notes. It was a story, a journey through fear, resilience, and hidden strength. People's emotions were being stirred, even those who had come with the intention of mocking or simply passing time. Some people held their hands to their chests, visibly moved. Others whispered soft words of admiration. Even strangers who had been skeptical found themselves smiling, surprised by the talent and the emotion he could convey without speaking. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as an attempt to embarrass him was now an experience that none of the audience would forget. He kept playing, careful not to rush, allowing each section of the music to flow naturally into the next. His fingers danced across the keys with precision, yet every note carried a human touch, something only someone who truly loved music could convey. The performance was becoming less about skill alone and more about expression. He was telling a story, and the audience, though silent, was listening intently. A man at the side, who had been recording on his phone, lowered it, unable to capture the depth of what was happening. Another person leaned forward, eyes wide, silently urging the pianist to continue. The child who had been watching earlier bounced slightly in excitement, completely absorbed in the unfolding scene. It was a rare moment where pure talent could captivate every age and background simultaneously. The group that had tried to humiliate him finally realized the full impact of what they had done. Their plan had backfired, not only failing to embarrass him but elevating him in the eyes of everyone present. They shifted uncomfortably, some whispering apologies to each other, others pretending to look away. It was a silent admission that they had underestimated not only his talent but his character. The man continued, now fully confident, playing with a fluidity and emotion that seemed almost effortless. Each note told a part of his story, each chord reflected resilience, and each pause carried quiet reflection. The audience felt it deeply. They did not need words to understand what was happening. The music itself was enough. For many, it was the first time they had experienced such a performance in a public, unplanned setting. He allowed himself to feel the music fully, to let go of lingering fear, and to embrace the moment. The piano was no longer an obstacle or a challenge. It was a partner. Together, they were creating something larger than the sum of their parts. The sounds he produced were now bold, confident, and expressive. Every note resonated with a truth that could not be denied. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the sound and the intensity of the performance. People stopped what they were doing to watch, captivated by the transformation of a man they had underestimated. Even strangers passing by paused, sensing that they were witnessing something special. The energy in the room was almost tangible, a mixture of awe, surprise, and respect. His breathing was steady, his focus unwavering. The fear that had initially threatened to overwhelm him had been replaced by determination and control. He had transformed a moment intended to humiliate into an opportunity to express his talent fully. Every movement, every note, every pause carried meaning, and the audience felt it deeply. By the time he finished this segment, the room was silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the spell. The music had left its mark on everyone present. What had started as a tense, uncomfortable challenge had turned into a display of skill and emotion that none of the observers could forget. He had taken control of the situation without aggression or confrontation, simply by being himself and letting his talent shine. Even the group that had initially tried to humiliate him could not deny the impact of what had just happened. Their expressions were a mix of awe and regret, realizing that their actions had led to a moment far beyond their intentions. They had wanted laughter. They had received admiration. They had tried to belittle. They had been forced to witness something extraordinary. As he paused briefly, catching his breath and preparing for the next part of his performance, the audience remained quiet, still absorbing what they had just heard. The tension that had defined the beginning of the moment had been replaced by respect, amazement, and anticipation. Everyone present knew that the story was not over, and they waited, eager to see where the music would go next. He, too, felt a renewed sense of confidence and purpose, ready to continue on this unexpected journey. The music grew even more powerful, each note resonating deeply through the room. He had moved beyond hesitation, beyond the fear of judgment, and now played with a boldness that commanded attention. His fingers flew across the keys with precision, yet every movement carried emotion, subtlety, and depth. The sound filled the space, vibrating through the floor and into the hearts of everyone listening. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as an attempt to humiliate him had become a performance that no one could ignore. The group that had mocked him now stood frozen, their previous amusement replaced with shock. They could not hide the disbelief on their faces. Each chord seemed to unravel their expectations, showing skill, passion, and control that they had not anticipated. Their plan to make him a spectacle of embarrassment had failed completely. Instead, they were witnessing the quiet triumph of someone they had underestimated. People in the crowd leaned closer, silent, captivated by the music. Some eyes widened, some mouths opened slightly in surprise, and a few people even held their breath as if afraid to break the spell. It was clear to everyone that this was not just skillful playing. It was an expression of something deeper, something human and raw. The emotion in the music touched each listener differently, stirring feelings that had nothing to do with the piano itself, but everything to do with the man who played it. The man had no intention of drawing attention to himself. He did not look around, did not smile, did not seek approval. He was lost in the sound, in the narrative he created through each note and chord. The audience was drawn in not by spectacle, but by sincerity. There was no pretense, no showmanship, only honesty conveyed through music. As the performance continued, the melody became more complex. He layered harmonies, played with tempo and dynamics, and introduced subtle variations that kept the audience on edge. Every change, every crescendo, and every pause was deliberate, carrying meaning beyond the notes themselves. Even those who had come expecting comedy or a mistake were now completely absorbed, unable to look away or doubt what they were hearing. A few people in the crowd exchanged quiet glances, astonished by the depth and beauty of the music. A young girl held her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with wonder. A man nearby whispered to his companion that he had never expected to hear something so moving in such a casual setting. Even strangers who had been skeptical from the start found themselves leaning in, recognizing the talent and emotion being expressed. The group that had tried to humiliate him now fidgeted, shifting from foot to foot. Their expressions betrayed both awe and regret. They realized that they had attempted to exploit a moment of vulnerability but instead had witnessed courage, skill, and artistry. Their confidence and amusement had vanished, replaced by a silent acknowledgement that they had been wrong. For the first time, they understood that appearances can be deceiving and that quick judgments often carry consequences. He did not pause or falter, even as the energy in the room changed. Instead, he fed off it, allowing the attention to sharpen his focus and intensity. Each chord, each note, each sequence was played with deliberate emotion, as if he were telling a story to every individual listening. He did not need words. The music spoke for him, revealing his feelings, his experiences, and his resilience. The sound grew louder, stronger, filling every corner of the space. People could feel it in their chest, in their hearts, and even in the tips of their fingers. Some closed their eyes to take it in fully, while others leaned forward, completely captivated. The combination of skill and emotional honesty was undeniable, leaving a lasting impression on all who were present. At one point, he introduced a pause, a quiet moment that contrasted with the intensity that had built. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with anticipation, with attention, with the unspoken recognition that something extraordinary was happening. The pause allowed the audience to catch their breath, to reflect, and to prepare for the next wave of sound that would follow. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that his mastery was not just in speed or complexity, but in control, in knowing when to hold and when to release. When the music resumed, it flowed even more smoothly, almost as if it were a conversation rather than a performance. Each note seemed to reach into the hearts of the listeners, leaving an impression that could not be forgotten. The audience could feel the story behind the music, the layers of emotion, and the personal journey that had brought the man to this moment. There was no room for doubt, no room for mockery, only attention, admiration, and awe. The people who had been skeptics, who had tried to humiliate him, now quietly stepped back, unsure where to look. Their laughter, their whispers, their teasing, all of it had vanished. What they had expected to be a source of entertainment at someone else's expense had become a testament to resilience, talent, and the power of authenticity. They were witnessing someone rise above fear and expectation, transforming a potentially embarrassing moment into something unforgettable. The audience grew larger, drawn by the sound and the intensity of the performance. People who had been passing by stopped, entranced by the unexpected music. Even those who had come with no interest in the piano found themselves captivated, swept along by the emotion and power of the playing. It was no longer a casual observation. It was a collective experience, a shared moment of awe and respect. He played on steadily with control and grace. The music flowed naturally, each transition seamless, each note intentional. The story he told through the piano became clearer with every passing moment, revealing the journey from fear and vulnerability to confidence and mastery. Those who listened could feel it, the transformation, the courage, the quiet strength that had allowed him to rise above the initial humiliation. By now, the atmosphere in the room was electric. People whispered in astonishment, some nodded in silent approval, and others simply stared, unable to tear themselves away. The energy had shifted completely, from doubt to admiration, from expectation to awe. What had begun as a cruel joke had evolved into a demonstration of talent and emotional depth that could not be ignored. Even the young child who had been watching earlier remained captivated, clinging to the parent's hand but unable to look away. The music spoke across generations, connecting people through emotion and sound. The performance was no longer about proving skill. It was about the honesty and courage of the person at the piano, and the audience felt it deeply. As the piece approached its climax, the intensity grew, each note ringing with clarity and purpose. His fingers moved effortlessly, yet every gesture carried meaning, a reflection of experience, resilience, and dedication. The audience, though silent, was fully engaged, experiencing the story in real time, feeling each emotion as it unfolded. When he finally reached the final chord, it lingered in the air, resonating long after the keys had been released. The room stayed silent for a moment, as if no one could break the spell. Even the group that had tried to mock him remained quiet, absorbing the reality of what they had just witnessed. Their plans for humiliation had been completely undone, replaced by a new understanding of courage, skill, and human depth. Then, slowly, a gentle applause began, soft at first, and then gradually growing louder. The sound of appreciation spread through the room, a collective recognition of the talent and bravery that had been on display. The man at the piano did not look up immediately. He simply allowed the music and the moment to settle. The applause continued, and the respect in the room was undeniable. What had begun as a plan to humiliate him had transformed into an unforgettable experience for everyone present. The power of his music, combined with his composure and courage, had left the audience speechless. He had taken control of a moment designed to belittle him and turned it into a triumph that spoke louder than words ever could. The story of this performance would remain in the memory of those who witnessed it, a testament to the unexpected strength and talent that can emerge when someone refuses to be defined by others' expectations. The final notes lingered in the air, gentle and clear, as if the piano itself were taking a deep breath. The man slowly lifted his hands, letting the silence settle over the room. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if everyone collectively realized what had just happened and could not immediately find words to describe it. The music had filled the space, and now the echo of it hung in the hearts of everyone present. The group that had tried to humiliate him shifted uncomfortably. Their faces showed a mix of embarrassment and awe. They had set out to provoke laughter, but now all they could do was stand quietly and acknowledge the reality of what they had witnessed. It was a silent recognition that they had been wrong, a quiet understanding that someone they had underestimated had risen far above their expectations. Slowly, one person began to clap. It was tentative at first, unsure, almost testing the water. Then another joined, and soon the soft clapping grew louder, filling the space with genuine appreciation. People began to smile, some with tears in their eyes, as the applause became a heartfelt acknowledgement of the courage, skill, and emotion that had been displayed. The music had moved them, touched them, and reminded them of something simple yet profound. the power of human talent and authenticity. The man at the piano did not rush to stand. He remained seated for a few moments, absorbing the reaction around him, letting the applause wash over him quietly. He did not seek praise, but he felt the weight of what had been accomplished. The fear and hesitation that had gripped him earlier were gone. He had faced an uncomfortable situation, and he had turned it into something beautiful, something meaningful, something unforgettable. People in the crowd began to speak softly to each other, sharing their surprise and admiration. Some mentioned the precision of his playing, others spoke of the emotion conveyed through each note. The young child who had been watching bounced slightly with excitement, clinging to a parent but unable to hide a smile of wonder. The parents, too, whispered about how unexpected and moving the performance had been. Strangers connected over this moment, bound by the shared experience of witnessing talent and courage triumph over judgment and fear. The group that had tried to humiliate him did not know how to react. Some avoided eye contact, still processing what had occurred. A few whispered apologies to each other, acknowledging that their actions had been unkind and unnecessary. The man at the piano did not respond. There was no need for confrontation. The impact of his performance had spoken louder than any words could. He had shown them and everyone else that true skill and authenticity could not be diminished by mockery or doubt. A few audience members approached quietly, complimenting him, expressing amazement at what they had just heard. Some shared their own experiences with music, their own struggles and fears, connecting over the vulnerability he had shown. The man nodded politely, a small, calm smile forming on his lips. He was grateful, but he remained humble. The moment was not about recognition. It was about expression, courage, and the quiet triumph of showing one's true self. As people began to disperse, the energy in the room shifted from shock to reflection. Conversations were quieter now, filled with a sense of respect and newfound awareness. The story of what had just happened began to spread immediately, shared by those who had witnessed it firsthand. Phones were lowered, but the memory of the music and the emotion it carried lingered in everyone's mind. The man slowly stood, stretching slightly after the long performance. He walked away from the piano without a word, leaving it behind as a witness to the moment. People watched him, some in awe, some in quiet admiration. The group that had initially mocked him remained silent, reflecting on their actions and the unexpected outcome. They had intended to cause discomfort, but instead, they had been part of a moment that would be remembered, a lesson in humility and respect. Outside, the world continued as usual, unaware of the transformation that had occurred inside. Yet for those who had witnessed it, the memory would remain vivid. The story was not just about skill on the piano, but about resilience, courage, and the power of staying true to oneself in the face of judgment. The music had spoken, and everyone present had heard it. The man walked through the crowd quietly, blending back into the world that often overlooked him. He did not seek recognition or praise. His satisfaction came from the act itself, from the knowledge that he had faced an uncomfortable challenge and turned it into something extraordinary. His experience was a reminder that strength is often quiet, courage is often understated, and true talent does not need validation to be real. The audience slowly left, carrying the experience with them. Some would replay the memory in their minds, reliving the surprise, the beauty, and the emotion of what they had witnessed. Others would tell friends and family, sharing a story of unexpected triumph, of a quiet person who turned a potentially humiliating moment into a powerful, unforgettable performance. The group that had pushed him to play would likely reflect on this day for a long time. They had learned a lesson about judgment, about humility, and about the danger of underestimating someone based on appearances. It was a quiet lesson, one delivered not through words or confrontation, but through music and authenticity. Their laughter and teasing had been silenced by skill, courage, and the simple truth that people cannot always be defined by others' expectations. As the room emptied, the man paused once more, glancing at the piano. He touched the keys lightly, a gesture of respect and connection. Then, without drawing attention to himself, he walked away, leaving behind an impression far greater than anyone could have anticipated. The music had done its work and he had done his. The story of what had happened, and the emotions it stirred, would remain in the memories of those present for a long time. It was a moment of unexpected triumph, a testament to courage, skill, and the quiet power of being true to oneself.